The surface of Varnox 7 burned like a furnace, split by glowing rivers of lava and endless ash storms that howled through the shattered valleys. It was a planet no sane creature dared to walk on, a world that tested the limits of even the hardiest machines. But still, the Galactic Relief Fleet arrived, cutting through the smoke-filled skies with silent precision. The distress signal had been clear. Someone was down there, alive. Captain Jellic, a seasoned officer of the Kern Medical Corps, stood at the front of the command deck, his sharp blue eyes scanning the chaos below. He had heard stories about the Deathworlders, a species that came from a planet so hostile that surviving it made them almost unnatural. But stories were stories. He didn't believe myths. Until now, the dropship touched down on a narrow stretch of solid ground between two molten ridges. The crew moved fast, wearing heat-resistant suits, pushing through the hot wind and raining embers. The crash site was a twisted pile of metal, half buried in a smoking crater. Flames licked at the edges, and sparks danced in the air. Zelik's boots crunched over black glass where the ground had melted and cooled. The wreckage wasn't Kern, nor any known Allied design. It was something older, patched together, human. And inside, they found him. A single figure lay motionless against a broken console, his face bruised, his armor cracked, and deep gashes marked his chest and side. But he was breathing. Barely. One of the medics raised a scanner, and it instantly lit up red with flashing alerts. Blood pressure unstable, oxygen levels dropping, heart rate spiking and falling again. Any normal species would have been dead already. Yet he lived. Captain Jellic gave the order, "Get him out, now." The team worked quickly, lifting the human carefully and laying him on a portable stretcher. His blood was everywhere, dark red and thick, and it flowed freely for only seconds before it began to harden, sealing the wounds in front of their eyes. The lead medic froze mid-motion, watching it with disbelief. "His blood, it's already clotting," she said, voice tight with confusion. Another medic ran a deeper scan. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "The injuries are severe, but his body is stabilizing itself." Jellic didn't respond right away. He stepped closer to the human, staring at the quiet rise and fall of his chest, the way his muscles still twitched with life. This wasn't just survival. This was something beyond anything they'd seen. A sudden gust of hot wind swept across the site, and the wreckage groaned, metal shifting and hissing as it cooled. The human's eyes fluttered. For a second, Jellic saw them open, glazed and bloodshot but alive. The man looked straight at him, cracked a small smile, and said with a dry voice, "You took your time." Then his head dropped back against the stretcher. The medics stared in silence. None of them had expected this. A living, talking human on one of the deadliest planets in the sector, bleeding but healing, conscious enough to speak after a crash that should have torn his body apart. It didn't feel real. Zelik's thoughts raced. If this was what a wounded human looked like, what were they like at full strength? And what kind of world shaped something that could survive this? The team hurried back to the dropship, keeping their patients stabilized, but no one said a word. The silence wasn't from fear. It was from something colder, deeper. A quiet understanding that they had just witnessed the start of something far bigger than a simple rescue. Something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about life, survival, and the terrifying potential of the species known as human. Inside the brightly lit medical bay of the Kern rescue cruiser, silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the hum of machines and the soft beeping of monitors tracking the human's unstable vitals. Captain Jellic stood with arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the operating table where the human lay, bloodied, broken, and somehow still alive. Around him, his medical team moved with caution, but their hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the injuries, but from the strange patterns their scanners revealed. The wounds across the human's chest were long and deep, torn open by the crash and the sharp wreckage, yet they were sealing on their own, inch by inch, without stitches, sealants, or regenerative nanogel. One gash, nearly 6 inches long, closed right before their eyes, forming a thick scab as dark red blood clotted and hardened in seconds. Ovella, the youngest medic, had been preparing a plasma stabilizer, but she stopped mid-motion, her eyes wide behind her visor. On her home planet, wounds like this spelled certain death within minutes. There was no way a living organism should be able to heal like that, not under this much trauma, not without help. "Captain, are we sure this isn't a biological defense mechanism?" she asked, her voice quiet, uneasy. Jellic didn't answer at first, watching as another wound slowed its bleeding and sealed itself completely. "We don't know what it is," he finally said, "so treat it as real until we understand it." The medics exchanged nervous glances but continued their work. Even so, there was hesitation in their hands, uncertainty in every movement. The equipment calibrated for dozens of known species had to be manually adjusted. None of their standard readings made sense here. The human's immune system was reacting faster than the injections. His oxygen levels, once falling rapidly, now held steady without aid. It was as if his body refused to die, adapting second by second, as if some ancient part of him still fought, still refused to give up. And then, suddenly, his eyes opened. Not fully, just enough for the lids to lift slightly, revealing dark, sharp eyes that flickered with life. The medics froze. Jellic stepped forward, unsure whether the man was conscious or hallucinating. The human blinked, squinted at the lights, and groaned softly. His voice, dry and cracked, broke the silence. "You guys always is slow." The words hit like a shockwave. Ovella actually stepped back, almost dropping her injector. One of the other medics muttered a curse under his breath. Jellic leaned in. "You're awake." The human smiled faintly, lips cracking. "Just resting my eyes." His humor, even in this state, felt surreal. How could he speak? How could he move at all after what he'd endured? "Stay still." "You're injured," Jellic said, though it felt ridiculous even as he said it. The human chuckled, a soft, hoarse sound. Not the first time. He turned his head slightly, looking at the Kern crews surrounding him. "Guess you've never seen a real Deathworlder before, huh?" No one answered. What could they say? The stories they dismissed as legends were unfolding in front of them. A creature that healed faster than their tech, survived crashes that would turn most beings to ash, and could crack jokes with torn lungs. Suspicion mingled with awe in Zelik's mind. Was this biology or something more? Evolution, engineering, instinct, whatever it was beyond what they understood. The medics continued their work, quieter now, almost reverent. They had come to rescue a survivor, but what they found was something far more rare. A living glimpse into a species that had not only survived a deathworld, but had been shaped by it into something the galaxy had never seen before. And for the first time, Jellic began to wonder. If this was what a human looked like while injured, what would they be like when fully healed? The med ship drifted silently in orbit above Varnox 7, but inside, its halls buzzed with tension and quiet awe. Captain Jace Rourke, the human Deathworlder pulled from the burning wreckage, now lay in a containment recovery chamber, awake, alert, and very much alive. The Kern medical staff had done all they could, but truthfully, they'd only observed. Jace's body had stabilized itself faster than any known species could. His skin regenerated at a speed beyond their instruments, his blood pressure self-corrected within minutes, and even his internal injuries were sealing as if his cells carried their own emergency team. The strangest part? Sedatives had no effect. The strongest compounds, ones that could knock out a 10-ton Drevix beast in seconds, were burned out of his system in under a minute. Each time they tried, his vitals spiked briefly and then leveled out, stronger, more stable than before. Alien biologists from 3 different sectors requested immediate access for study, but Jellic denied them all. Not out of policy, but because the humans scared him in a way that was hard to explain. Not fear of danger, but fear of the unknown. That kind of resilience shouldn't exist. It wasn't just unusual, it was impossible by every biological law the Kern understood. Jellic eventually decided to question the man directly. Inside the chamber, Jace sat upright, shirt off, with only a few fading scars left from wounds that should have taken months to recover. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if he were used to being the center of confusion. Jellic entered slowly, nodding to the guards outside the door. "You shouldn't be walking yet," he said, trying to keep his voice firm. "And yet here I am," Jace replied with a grin, stretching his shoulders casually. Jellic pulled out a data pad. "Your biology doesn't match any survival pattern in our records. Your cells regenerate faster than some machines. You break rules we didn't know could be broken. What are you?" Jace leaned back against the wall, his smile fading just a little. "I'm human. From Earth. You've heard of us, right?" Jellic nodded. The word had been tossed around in military reports and distant whispers. Deathworlders, they were called. Survivors of a planet labeled too dangerous for colonization. But this was something else. "We thought your species was exaggerated," Jellic admitted. "Legends told by traders. But you're real. And what your body can do." Jace interrupted, his tone growing more serious. "It's not magic. It's survival. Earth doesn't care if you're smart or strong. It just wants to kill you. Storms, beasts, plagues, the ground, the sky, it all tries to end you. So we adapted. Not perfectly. Just enough to make it to the next fight." Jellic stared at him silent. He had seen thousands of injured soldiers in his career, but none like this. None who healed themselves from fatal wounds in hours and walked away with a joke on their lips. "Your planet," Jellic said slowly, "made you like this." Jace nodded. "We didn't get stronger because we wanted to. We got stronger because we had to." Outside the glass walls, other scientists watched, listened, and slowly began to realize what they were witnessing wasn't just an alien. It was a preview of what evolution looked like under endless pressure. Earth had pushed its people to the edge, over and over again, and instead of breaking, they adapted. Jace wasn't a miracle. He was a warning. The medship's crew left that chamber with more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. The galaxy had misjudged the Deathworlders. They weren't reckless, they weren't careless, and they weren't lucky. They were the result of a planet that showed no mercy, and in surviving it, they had become something entirely new. The flagship of the Galactic Relief Fleet, normally a place of calm coordination and clinical precision, buzzed with electric tension. News of the human survivor had spread fast, far beyond the Kern medical course. Within 48 hours, an emergency symposium was assembled aboard the flagship, drawing xenobiologists, trauma surgeons, and evolutionary researchers from across the Galactic Council. They came with curiosity, doubt, and a fair share of skepticism. Some believed the reports were exaggerated, others hoped to witness a new species, and a few just wanted answers to the impossible. Inside the Grand Medical Auditorium, footage played on towering holoscreens. Slow-motion replays showed Jace Rourke's injuries sealing in real time, deep lacerations knitting themselves shut in under 20 minutes. Immune scans revealed microcellular activity so rapid it blurred the instruments. Toxin resistance, clotting efficiency, shock tolerance, all measured at levels well beyond any known intelligent life form. Gasps echoed as numbers filled the screens. Some whispered in disbelief. One elder surgeon from the Kelari cluster leaned over to his colleague and said, "This must be an error. No body heals like that." Another muttered, "Is he even organic?" Jellic, standing near the front, remained quiet, arms crossed, watching the data with a blank face. He already knew what they were about to learn, and just as the lead presenter, a four-armed Groven pathologist, began explaining the regenerative anomalies, the doors at the back of the hall hissed open. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. And then came the moment no one expected. Jace Rourke walked into the room. No stretcher, no cane, no assistance. Just him, shoulders relaxed, boots thudding lightly on the polished floor, wearing a basic medship uniform with the sleeves rolled up, revealing faint scars that looked weeks old instead of 3 days fresh. For a split second, silence. Then, chaos. A sharp gasp rang out from the front row. One medic dropped their scanner with a loud clatter. Another blinked rapidly, then collapsed backwards in a dead faint. The lead Groven pathologist stepped away from the podium in stunned confusion, his 3 eyes wide. "Wait, you're walking already," someone shouted. Jace paused at the edge of the stage, giving the crowd a crooked smile. "Why wouldn't I?" he said, casually stretching one arm. "Back home, if you don't move, something eats you." Laughter erupted from a few corners, nervous, uncertain, but genuine. Others stared, unsure whether to be impressed or alarmed. Jace looked around at the sea of stunned experts, noting the tension in their faces. "Let me guess," he said, "you've never seen someone bounce back like this." He walked up to the table where the holoscreen was projecting an image of his own blood sample, cells glowing like they were on fire. "Truth is, we don't bounce back because we're special. We do it because we have no other choice." A young researcher in the back whispered, "This changes everything." Jellic finally stepped forward. "Captain Rourke, the Council's best minds are here because your recovery challenges every medical law they know. They want to understand. Your biology, it isn't just an outlier. It's a complete contradiction." Jace tilted his head. "You think I'm the contradiction? Try growing up on a planet with venomous clouds, apex predators that stalk you for days, and weather that changes moods every 10 minutes. He gestured toward the data on screen. "This isn't weird. It's normal for us." The auditorium fell into a heavy silence as the weight of that statement settled. The symposium, once a gathering for analysis, now felt more like a wake for outdated science. They weren't just looking at a new species, they were facing the reality that evolution had taken a far more brutal path somewhere out there in the stars. And in doing so, it had forged something the galaxy wasn't ready for. Not stronger, not smarter, just relentless. Even as his body continued to heal at an unbelievable pace, Captain Jace Rourke spent his recovery in the med bay not resting, but talking, sharing stories that soon drew more attention than any medical chart ever could. What began as quiet conversations with a few curious medics turned into informal gatherings, where members of the Kern and other species lingered near his bed, drawn in by the raw, brutal tales of a world none of them could imagine surviving. Jace spoke with a calmness that made the horrors sound almost casual, like memories from a long, strange childhood. He talked of infections that ate through skin in hours, insects that could paralyze with a single bite, and oceans so deep their pressure could crush submarines like tin cans. He described earthquakes that split highways apart, lizards that buried entire towns, and wild predators with teeth longer than their prey's limbs. Each tale painted Earth not as a nurturing home, but a planet locked in a permanent struggle between life and extinction. The alien listeners sat in silent fascination, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dread. Some took notes, others just stared. One afternoon, as the group listened intently, Jace leaned back and lifted his shirt, revealing a thick, jagged scar across his lower ribs. "This one," he said, tapping the mark with a knuckle. "Rhino. Big one. Charged me when I was 16. A stunned silence followed. The scar looked more like the aftermath of a battlefield wound than an animal attack. Ovela, standing near the back, spoke in a near whisper. "And you survived that too." Jace grinned like it was nothing. "Of course, I had a stick." The entire room froze. Someone coughed. Another shook their head slowly, unable to process whether he was joking or being painfully honest. It didn't matter. Either way, it was terrifying. Jace went on, speaking of disease outbreaks, survival camps, near drownings, and jungle treks gone wrong. He told them about the time a lightning strike blew a tree apart 2 meters from his tent, and another when he lost radio contact in a snowstorm for 2 full days. But what shocked the medics most wasn't the pain or the danger. It was how normal these stories seemed to him. There was no drama in his tone, no flair for attention. This was just life on Earth. Each scar was a memory, not of glory or violence, but of survival. Slowly, a new realization settled over the listeners like a shadow creeping through the room. The galaxy had long feared humans as potential warriors, unpredictable and reckless. But now they understood something deeper. Earth had not bred its people for conquest or aggression. It had simply left them no choice but to adapt or die. Their toughness wasn't trained. It was inherited from generations clawing through adversity. Their resilience wasn't pride. It was necessity. Jace didn't talk like a soldier. He talked like someone who had been tested since birth and never once given the option to be weak. And for the first time, the galactic medics looked at him not as a subject to study, but as a mirror reflecting what life could be like when the environment didn't protect you, but tried to kill you every single day. The data, the scans, the charts, they were nothing compared to these moments, these raw insights. Jace Rourke, a single human from a planet none of them dared visit, had shown them something far more valuable than numbers. He had shown them the cost of survival, and the kind of creature that cost could create. Curiosity had reached its breaking point. Jace Rourke's recovery, his impossible biology, and the stories of his terrifying homeworld had shaken the Galactic Council's brightest minds to their core, but data alone wasn't enough anymore. A group of elite researchers from multiple species came together with a single goal: test the limits of this human. They didn't need him physically present, just his blood. A small vial, taken during his first examination, was all they required. Inside the high-security biolab aboard the flagship, the team began their experiments. They introduced his blood cells to extreme stimuli, chemical burns, acid exposure, vacuum environments, and intense radiation. The intention was to see degradation, failure, limits. Instead, they witnessed something that froze every observer in place. The human blood cells didn't just survive. They changed, in real time. The acid attack should have destroyed them in seconds, but instead, the membrane thickened and became more resistant. Under vacuum pressure, the cells compressed, adapted their structure, and resumed function. Radiation didn't break them apart. It triggered accelerated protein synthesis. One xenobiologist dropped his tablet in disbelief. "They're not just tough," he muttered. "They're responding. Learning." The researchers, driven by equal parts awe and obsession, decided to push further. They introduced dormant alien pathogens into the chamber, hoping to observe a baseline immune response. But something else happened, something no one expected. The pathogens didn't spread or multiply. Jace's immune cells reacted instantly, but they didn't just attack, they studied. The cells surrounded the pathogens, absorbed traces of their structure, and began altering themselves. Within minutes, the pathogens began to die off one by one. It was as if the blood had understood the threat and adjusted faster than any natural immune system should. Then the alarms went off. The AI core running the laboratory triggered an emergency lockdown. The screens turned red. Biological flashed in multiple languages. Sterile gas filled the test chamber as robotic arms retracted. Power began shutting down room by room. The lead researcher, Dr. Mekar, a coldly logical Dranathi, stumbled back from the control station, pale and trembling. His cells, he whispered, almost to himself, they're not just reacting, they're evolving. Outside the glass, Shattuck had been observing everything in silence. His arms were folded, but his expression shifted from focused curiosity to something far heavier. Fear. He had seen strange biology before, encountered mutations, and even treated survivors of genetic weaponry. But nothing like this. Not cells that learned, not blood that seemed to think. The AI refused to reboot the lab systems. It had flagged the sample as a possible existential threat. Jellic stepped forward and looked through the observation window at the now sterilized chamber. The blood sample, once a simple red droplet on a glass slide, had darkened and thickened, but it hadn't broken down. It was still alive, still adapting. The room behind him buzzed with chaos. technicians yelling into comms, researchers demanding overrides, the sound of auto-seals locking lab doors one by one. But Jellic heard none of it. His mind was focused only on one thing. What if this wasn't the extent of human biology? What if Jace Rourke, incredible as he was, wasn't even the most advanced his species had to offer? What if this was just normal for Earth's people? The implications sank in like a weight. Evolution wasn't supposed to move this fast. No species was supposed to respond to threats this intelligently on a cellular level. And yet here it was, right in front of them. Zelik's eyes narrowed as he whispered under his breath, This changes everything. Because now he knew, the human body wasn't just surviving, it was preparing. And no one could guess what it would be ready for next. The final days aboard the galactic flagship were marked by a quiet tension, less of fear now, and more of reverence. The Council, after reviewing every scan, every data point, and every eyewitness report, held a private session unlike any before. No one shouted, no one debated. They had seen too much, and the conclusion was inevitable. A rare statement was issued to all Council member civilizations. Humanity, the so-called Deathworlders of Earth, would henceforth be classified as Class 5 biohazard survivors, not as a warning of threat, but as a mark of deep respect. This classification was reserved for species that had not simply evolved under stress, but had survived environments that would annihilate others before they could crawl. It was the first time such a designation had ever been awarded to an intelligent species. Across the fleet, whispers passed from lab to lab, bridge to bridge. Humans were no longer considered unstable newcomers to be monitored. They were now something else entirely, creatures shaped by catastrophe, sharpened by survival, and carried by a biology that refused to quit. As preparations were made for Captain Jace Rourke's return to Earth, many still watched him with a strange mixture of awe and caution. Not because he had done anything violent, but because of what he represented, the proof that somewhere out in the galaxy, life had been forced to fight every step of the way. When Jace stepped toward the shuttle ramp, the docking bay was filled with quiet figures, medical officers, researchers, security, and even diplomats. Shelek stood at the front of them, his usual stern expression softened by something closer to admiration. He raised his arm in a formal Kern salute, one typically reserved for heroes returning from war. "You've changed everything, Deathworlder," he said, his voice steady. "We thought we understood life. We were wrong." Jace paused at the top of the ramp and turned with his trademark crooked grin. "Tell your medics to work on their reaction time," he replied, tone playful but with an edge of truth. "We don't always have time to bleed." A few chuckles echoed in the hangar, nervous, respectful, but real. Then the shuttle doors slid closed with a soft hiss, sealing Jace inside. Engines hummed to life, and within minutes, the craft lifted away from the ship and vanished into the dark canvas of space. But he hadn't really left. Not completely. His presence lingered, in data logs, in security reports, in whispered retellings of what had happened in that lab. Somewhere in the fleet, a junior medic muttered, "His blood, it learned." And the one next to him replied, "Maybe that's not the scary part. Maybe the scary part is that he didn't seem surprised." Across the stars, the story began to travel. Not just a tale of a crash survivor, but of a human whose blood clotted before anyone could stop it, whose immune system studied threats like a scholar, and who joked while walking off injuries that should have killed him. It became a myth, a warning and a lesson all at once. In council meetings, military briefings, and science halls, the phrase Deathworlder resilience took root. Entire divisions were formed just to study Earth's biosphere. Cautionary tags were placed on Earth-related missions. But behind all the fear and awe was something more powerful: respect. Because the galaxy now understood that the human race didn't rise through luck or technology. They had survived because their world had tried to kill them since the beginning. And instead of breaking, they had adapted, fought, and evolved into something the galaxy had never expected. And somewhere out there, returning home through the cold stars, a human with a stick, a scar, and a smile carried the legend with him.